Hello, hey, this is Ian Carlin. Thanks for joining me on the Empty Cup podcast. You are living in the world where traditional and modern martial arts collide. And some people might say this is the world where traditional and modern martial arts reside. Either one is fine with me. Today on the show, we have Alexandrina Delage. Is that how you say it? Sorry if I messed that up. Say it for us, for our audience.
It's Alexandrina Delage.
Alexandrina Delage. Okay.
Right.
And this is going to be an exciting topic because it's something that I've actually wanted to do for a while. A lot of the show is dedicated to talking about self-defense and talking about, what it really takes to survive on the street. And everybody knows, if you listen to this program, you know that I love all kinds of martial arts. I love sport karate. I love, the artistic stuff. I love, the self-defense aspects of it. I love MMA. I'm just a martial arts buff. I like it all and I find value in it all. But a lot of it really comes back to, in my mind, a lot of it really comes back to my primary concern is, am I going to be able to take care of myself if I'm walking to my car and somebody approaches me with a knife or a gun or empty fists, or more than one person approaches me and I have to actually defend myself in a real life situation. That's, in my mind, that's my ultimate goal. Even though I love all kinds of martial arts, that's my ultimate goal. And for me, it's a challenge in and of itself, but I wanted to get a woman's perspective on women's martial arts. And that's why we have our guest today, because she is going to be our expert and has done a lot. You just recently got your black belt in a style too, didn't you?
I did, yeah. Yes.
Now I know you work with Kevin Secor from Combat Systema, and you've been with him for a while. But the black belt was in what style particularly?
It was still under Kevin Secor, but it's under Modern Kempo Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, okay. And very interesting. Is there a lot of groundwork in that?
Yes, but it's not like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a Japanese type of Jiu-Jitsu. So it's based on the samurai tradition, but it's been modernized. So it is a very effective art. And most of the work that I do when I teach self-defense comes from the Jiu-Jitsu that I've learned.
Okay, all right. Yeah. And we will get into that shortly, but we always like to take a few steps back and kind of talk about you and where you started in martial arts and how you came to be where you are today. So tell us a little bit about that. What age were you when you got interested in martial arts? What was your first martial art that you ever explored? Please let us know.
Well, thank you. Let's put it this way. When I was a kid, I was a tomboy and I liked to fight. And of course, when you're 9, 10, 11 years old, girls, boys, relatively the same. But of course, as you get older, it becomes different. And of course, the strengths become different. But I've always been a fighter at heart. And very young, I wanted a punching bag at home, but that would not have been possible. And so I didn't know that martial arts existed. I did get bullied at school. Not huge amounts, but enough to just want to isolate myself. And so I kind of went on my own way to try to figure things out and to strengthen myself within instead of trying to be strong towards the outside. When I was a little bit older in my teenage years, I had a friend who used to do karate, and she brought me telling me, you should try this out. And I went, and the crew was very nice and the teachers were awesome, but it just didn't feel right to me. And so I always had that kind of fight instinct, but I didn't have the right space.
Right. What kind of karate was it, if you don't mind me asking?
I am so sorry. I have no idea. It was at a YMCA. It was at a YMCA, and they were doing competitions. I mean, everything was about the sportive application and she became an Olympian. So it was all about competition. And so to me, it didn't make that much sense. Training in rows didn't make that much sense to me. So I wouldn't have been able to tell you why. It didn't fit with me. It was only really, really later, and the other thing I need to say is that I used to hate everything that was phys ed. I would avoid everything that was fitness because I hated it. And truth be told, I've always been lucky with my genes. I was very thin, so I looked healthy, but I was very, very far from being healthy. And I just didn't want to do any kind of conditioning. So later in life, I met a massage therapist who said, yoga is great, but you have tiger energy that you need to release, and you should be doing martial arts. And so it connected because I thought, yeah, that's true. I've always had an interest. I just didn't know where to go. And I didn't really push because I didn't like to do fitness. So when she said that, I started to look for schools. And that was a very interesting endeavor. I visited quite a few schools of different types of martial arts. One of them, I believe, was Shaolin. And what I knew was at that point in time, I was 33. Okay. And at that point in time, I knew that I wanted something that was going to be effective. I wanted to know everything about the different types of weapons that existed. I wanted to know how to defend myself against a gun, a knife, a stick. Like you said, empty-handed. I wanted to do something that would have a purpose. I'm not good at going to the gym and doing weights. It's not motivating enough for me. And I'm not really good at doing Zumba either. There's no immediate purpose to me. So for me, I really needed to find a school that was going to provide something that was smart and intelligent and useful. And the other thing is that I had gone to a boxing class thinking that that would be really cool and I'd be able to learn things. But at that class, it was at university. And in that class, the teacher was making us do some warm-up exercises that were extremely harmful to the body. And even though I didn't have any knowledge of physicality and understanding the body, I knew that that just was wrong. So in my quest to find a school, I wanted to find a teacher that had good knowledge of the body mechanics, understanding muscles, understanding what's healthy. I wanted my teacher to have a global, a holistic approach, not just learning to hit, to be able to hit, but having all of the notion of the psychology and making sure that you're healthy in whatever you're doing. And so finally, I came across Kevin's website. And so it seemed really interesting, and it was hitting all of the targets that I was aiming. So I sent him an email, and it was 2 lines saying, I'm very petite. I want to know if what you teach would work for me, and would I be able to train in your school? And he sent me this super long email. And I was like, okay, well, he can talk the talk. Now let's see, can he walk the talk? And so I visited him. I had a private class with him. And you've met him. You know how fast he teaches, how fast he talks. I was completely overwhelmed, but I knew that he knew his shit. And then I was like, okay, I need to try the class. And then the guys came in, and they changed into their black gis for modern Kempo Jiu-Jitsu. And I was like, you mean black gis exist? And then there was a whole attitude that was there. And I was like, okay, this is a different ballgame than anything I've ever seen. And after my first class was modern Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, and that was it. I knew my life in that particular moment, in that 2 hours of training, my life had completely changed. I wanted to train. I wanted to get past my physical inabilities and inadequacies, and I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be fit, and I wanted to learn this stuff. And that's how it began. And truth be told, I started with modern Kempo Jiu-Jitsu and then started to integrate combat Sistema, which at the time was Russian Sistema, and that's it. That's all I've ever done.
Okay, interesting. And how long have you been at that school with Kevin?
I've been with Kevin, training under Kevin for almost 12 years now.
Oh, wow. Wow. So quite a significant time. Quite a significant amount of time. That's really good. Now, I wanted to step back a little bit because you hit on something that I think is important, and that is training in a way that doesn't injure you. You know what I mean? That's important. That's really important. when I do jujitsu, and well, I do lots of stuff, but jujitsu is one of the things that I do. And I know that sometimes I sacrifice my body
Yes.
to lay an arm lock on or something like
Yes.
that. And I don't think any school is really above that at times,
Of
but
course not.
but sometimes there are schools that feature it. You know what I mean? They're like,
Yes.
okay, like you didn't really work out unless you come out with a concussion, you know.
Yes.
And I just don't like that. I can't deal with that. I've got to train. I'm older now, and I've got to train kind of at least more safe. That was, when I was younger, that may have been a possibility for me to, get myself beat up every time I went to class. And, it's like, well, it wasn't class unless you bled or something like
That's
that. But
right.
but these days it's just like, nah, I'm okay with just working the drills and doing some light sparring and some light rolling and things like that. So it sounds like you're on the same page when it comes to that. How important is that for martial arts training, particularly with women? You find that important to make sure that you at least have a mental attitude of staying healthy,
Yes,
non-injurious?
absolutely. Well, that's the thing. Of course, you will injure yourself at some point when you do any kind of martial or self-defense activity. Okay, you can have as many pads as you want, but when you're not used to it, you move in a particular way, your partner moves in a particular way, and then you clash into each other. It happens. And truth be told, we do need to strengthen our psyche by strengthening our bodies. I do not, however, believe in damaging our bodies. But
Mhm.
pushing ourselves, yes, absolutely. You need to be able to see what you're capable of. So, have I had classes where I've had bruises? Yes, but I've never broken anything major, and I've trained hard. What I want is to train hard. I want to know that I've pushed myself as much as I possibly could, but there
Mhm.
is no point in learning self-defense if I'm going to destroy myself in the process. And to
Right,
me,
right.
it all comes down to respect. It needs to be about respecting yourself. So if at any point you're with a partner that's going crazy or haywire on you, you need to be able to say, first, okay, acknowledge this is what is happening. And second, be respectful of yourself enough to say, okay, I need to stop. I need to stop either training with this partner. I need to have a different partner. I need to train smoother or slower. You need to respect yourself because otherwise, especially if your goal is for self-defense, you need to make sure that you're not integrating fear within yourself while you're training.
Mhm.
While you're
Wow,
training
very
is where you're,
important.
yes, it's where you're acquiring strength. So if you're integrating fear in a space that's supposed to be safe, well, there's no point. You're going against everything that you're trying to create for yourself, which is building confidence in your skills and in yourself.
Yeah, wow. Talk about a truth bomb there, Alexandrina. That was quite a truth bomb. Yeah, you don't want to start developing fear. And being in martial arts as long as I've been in martial arts, I've been involved in women's self-defense programs before,
Okay.
and some of them have been, I would say fairly good. I would say the majority of them have been fairly good. Some of them have been fairly bad, and then some
Yeah.
of them, have been really good. But I've seen this, um, because kind of guys get in there, we slug it out, and we're like, oh, we're tough, that kind of thing. But you get a woman. I've seen women get actually turned off. And
Yeah.
one time, it was up at a camp. It was up at a Wing Chun camp that I went to, and there's a lot of factors. It's not like there's one person to blame. You have the attitude of the school in
Of
general,
course.
you have the attitude of the instructors, and you have the attitude of the people who, the individuals who are fighting. They all kind of come together to create what's happening. And
Exactly.
it was really sad because I saw this girl go up against a guy, and it was like the first thing you did when we did Wing Chun camp is we just get in lines. They just separate the students out. They'd get them in lines, and they would evaluate you to see what you'd need to work on throughout the rest of the camp. And they would just put you together, and you'd fight for like a minute and a half, and then
Oh,
the next person would fight. And this girl went up, and this is like her first time, and a guy
oh,
just totally punched her in her face.
oh, come
And
on.
I cannot believe that. Yeah, and I cannot believe that. that this girl had a good time for the rest of the camp. She probably is now afraid,
Yeah.
you know, uh, not, not wanting to participate. She was crying, and the guy felt bad, and that's why I said there's a lot of factors, because I knew it wasn't just his fault. It was people pushing him seeing other fights, his first time,
Exactly.
adrenaline going,
Yeah.
it was his fault to an extent, because he shouldn't have done that, but it was also everybody else around kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
So I know that's important to, start to build courage rather than start off with fear.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, you're absolutely right. The thing is that there are so many things that happen in that dynamic. And, of course, I've specialized and developed programs for women and for high school, but I also teach co-ed, and I see the dynamics between men and women, and what it creates, and how women act, how men act. There's a lot of ego that goes around. When it's only
Mhm.
men, there's a lot of ego that goes around. But when a
Right.
woman comes in, and I remember I was training with Kevin, and Kevin was going to the summer camp of Vlad's, right, of
Right.
Vladimir Vasiliev, and I was like, oh, I want to do the camp, I want to do the camp, and he was saying, wait, train a little bit more before you do the camp. And truth be told, if you really want to learn more about yourself, instead of spending $2,000 for the camp, why don't you just go in Toronto directly and then go at Vlad's school in Toronto? And he says, trust me, at the end of that, you'll either be broken or you'll feel like a warrior. But no matter what, it's going to be difficult training, but at least you'll be training. And so
Right.
I went to Toronto, and the guys were big. And I will always remember, on my first night, I was the only woman in the class, and there's a guy who said, aren't you in the wrong room? Aren't you supposed to be in the ballet room that's the next garage over?
Oh man.
And that was my introduction to Toronto and Vlad school. And I was like, okay, I better get tough. And, you need to understand, I weigh 100 pounds and I'm 5'4". So I'm a tiny little thing.
Uh-huh.
And by the end of it, I had proven what I needed to prove, but it had been extremely difficult, and I had had men who were treating me like, you want to be here, then you're going to pay for it. And
Yeah.
then there were the men who were, you are so brave to be here, let me show you and help you into getting better. So you have different types of people, and when you start, it's really difficult to know who to trust. And the thing is you need to persevere. You need to continue. You need to push through. And so I was lucky. I did find good partners. And I have to say, Kevin is a phenomenal instructor in understanding what it's like to be small. And so he helped me a lot in staying the course, because he
Hmm.
constantly reminded me that when you're smaller, technique is even more important, and that what you need to develop above all else is fierceness. You got to be fierce, and it's all about the psyche. And so I stayed the course. My goal was to become strong enough so that I could teach a program to women, so that women would have access to this work without being fearful of going
Uh-huh.
into a space where they would be worried or where they would feel judged.
Right on. So let's step back for just a second, because this kind of puts me onto something that I really want to talk about. I want to bring up, because this is so interesting. What you're talking about, because when we're talking about self-defense, and you said, "Oh, I've done self-defense. I've done women's self-defense." Okay, if I'm teaching self-defense and I have a group of people, like 5 guys and 2 girls or something like that, or 10 guys and 4 girls or something like that,
Mhm,
I'm that's going to be like, it's going to be like I'm going to teach it a certain way. But if I put up women's self-defense,
mhm,
okay, so I want you to talk about that now, because I want you to say, okay, so what is the distinguishment? What's the
mhm,
actual functional distinguishment when you are actually starting to run a women's self-defense class? Like, what do we need to know?
mhm,
Do we need to run it differently? Do we not need to run it differently? Do we need to run it
mhm,
just the same?
mhm.
All that stuff. So I know it's a big question, but let's get into that now. Like, okay, so women's self-defense. So
Yes.
we're going to go into a class. What are you going to teach? And is it going to be different than like a general self-defense class?
Okay, so your question is pertinent, and at any time you have questions, just nudge me a little bit because I can go on forever, okay? When I started to learn martial arts with Kevin, the one thing that I noticed is it was very difficult because most of the students that were there were guys, and I was confronted to situations where I felt either despair or fear or anxiety. Sometimes I had amazing partners, don't get me wrong, there were awesome guys there, but at times I really found it difficult to train, and a lot of emotions would come up. And then I wanted to look tough and I wanted to be tough, so I wouldn't cry in class, but then I would get back home and be like, what the fuck? It's never going to end, and I'm so small, and what the shit, and how am I going to do this? And so I would always have my moments of despair.
Right.
And then maybe a year in, I started to understand a bit more what I was doing, and so I was helping my partners to become better at whatever they were doing. So teaching has always been something present for me. And at that point, I thought, okay, I need to get myself so strong and so knowledgeable that I'm able to create that environment for women so that when they come in, they don't have that fear. So that that fear is eliminated so that they can concentrate on learning the technique. So I know that some people think that it's a feminist element, but it's mostly an element of giving a space that is safe for women to live their emotions while they're there and to feel safe as they are training the drills. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that women are, of course, and I'm not saying that men aren't, because usually the statistics, at least in Canada, 84% of assaults on women are by people that they know. 74% of assaults on men are by people that they know, okay? When we look at the numbers of people who actually say that they were assaulted, the numbers are the same. Men and women, it's like 1.6 million, every year of people getting assaulted. So what I wanted was to make sure that I created an environment where women who had been assaulted, and that's the majority, whether they admit it or not, that they could come and start to learn progressively techniques to strengthen their self-confidence. And majority of the time, the assaults are by men. So it would be very difficult for women to learn to defend themselves against men right off the bat when they were assaulted, usually by a man. Okay, so there's a lot of the psyche that needs to be taken care of when you teach self-defense, especially when your clients, men or women, have been assaulted. Okay, so that notion is extremely important. So it was really about creating a safe environment. So yes, I teach the same things that I would teach in a co-ed class, but I do teach it differently. I teach it differently because I want them to progressively acquire strength. So no, I will not make them start to grapple like crazy, the same way that I would do to the guys. I'm going to be much tougher in a co-ed class because I want them to push themselves, and because guys, they want to fight. So you need to give the guys the ability to fight. And you also need to give everyone the ability to say, I need to go slower. I need to go smoother. I don't want to do this drill. Everyone should have that ability to respect and decide what they want to do. But in a women's environment, it's much easier to acquire that because everything is smooth. And also, I break things down a lot more. I make very small pieces so that every time there's success. And then, like Kevin, there's always a notion where there needs to be pressure testing, because I abhor self-defense classes that say are for women, that teach, for example, how to get out of the mount position, that give no resistance whatsoever. The woman gets out of the mount position, and then everybody applauds like it's amazing. And then this person goes out into life thinking that she can defend herself from a 250-pounder aggressive male that is
Mm-hmm.
trying to destroy her, thinks she's able to do it, and then finds herself again in the situation and then can't get out.
Right,
Just
right.
think for a sec what that creates for that woman's psyche. So to me, there needs to be a reality-based element in everything that we do. We need to remind people why we're doing what we're doing, but they need to understand the reality. So even if it's women training with women, I always bring back the reality. And so for me, that's where the psyche comes in even more.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach you all the techniques in the world, but
Right, right.
if you don't feel like you deserve to defend yourself or that you can defend yourself, you won't. Nothing is going to come out.
Yeah, that's so important that you have to develop that killer instinct, to be able to pull the trigger. And it's like you have to have a baseline of strength.
Yep,
You have to have that killer instinct, and you have to be able to do to do the techniques on the spot without thinking about them. It has to be part
exactly.
of your
Exactly.
your muscle memory. It's just
Yep,
like if someone's it's just like if someone's strength's up here and someone's strength's down here, the technique's not going to do it.
of
If
course.
someone's strength's here and another person's strength's like right here, yeah, technique can put you over the top.
Mm-mm.
But it's just like a friend of mine, Adam Chance, said, I know all the martial arts in the world, but you put me in a cage with a bear, it doesn't matter. He's too
Yeah,
strong. He's too strong. So that fierceness, you've
yeah,
got to build it. You've got to
yeah.
build that that it's physical strength, but it's also mental strength too.
It has
Because
to be.
when you're dealing with somebody who's going to attack a woman, this isn't MMA. This is, hey, I'm at the ATM. There's someone. They're looking for victims.
Yep,
And if you present yourself like a victim, they they're going to take advantage of you. But if you present yourself like not a victim, even if you might be a little weaker, but
yep,
you have that
exactly.
intensity emotional strength,
Yeah,
they are going to they're not going to want that because they know that there's going to be screaming, there's going to be a fight, they're going to move on to the next person. And that's what's
exactly.
important when it comes to this, because it's that mental attitude. It's techniques too, because you have to have the techniques. I mean, I have to know how
Of course.
to move out of the way when somebody's trying to grab me or grab my throat, or or somebody has a knife or something like that. You need to know the techniques. That's of course that's the truth.
Yeah,
But again, like I said, it's like the techniques in the world don't matter if you don't have that mental fierceness that you were talking about.
yeah,
Um, So let's talk a little bit about techniques. Okay, so we get the mental fierceness on our side. I can see that you are very interested in developing that for good reason, good cause,
yeah,
and that goes so. I think that goes so far in actually defending yourself that, I mean, that's got to be at least a good 70% of it. Because again, so a guy who's actually looking to hurt you is looking for a victim, and if you don't
yeah.
present yourself as a victim,
It's done.
it's yeah, it's done.
Yeah,
But let's go into the techniques a bit though, because that does make up part of the curriculum, I'm sure.
of
So
course.
talk about, for a woman's self-defense class, what techniques particularly are do you define? Do you find to be important?
Okay. So if it's okay with you, the one thing that I would like to say before I go into technique, because we talked
Sure.
about fierceness, but to me, there's 3 levels of work that I do with
Okay. Yeah,
in my
please.
classes. Yeah. And so the first level is prevention, because to me it's like you say, if you have a posture, if you have a demeanor that is attractive to a predator, then yes, it's more likely that an attack will be made upon you. So for me, everything that has to do with posture, your capacity for early detection, your capacity for avoiding danger as much as possible, listening to your gut, making sure that if you're uncomfortable in a situation, you don't stay. These are all elements that are extremely important, as well as assertiveness. Your capacity to define your space, these are all elements that are required and necessary. And to me, they are 95% of the work. Then I go into what I call the tactical measures, which is how do I position my body in relation to somebody else? So how do I angle myself in a way that I can keep my distance, but also start to do spinal loading, like what Kevin talks about, so that I can prepare myself for combat if ever I need to fight back. And that's really important to me. And so there are many levels there, because again, women have this concern where they don't want to hit. First of all, they don't want to hit because they don't like to hit. They don't want to hurt someone, but they also don't want to hit because they're afraid of getting hit back, right? And they don't quite know how they're going to deal with it. So they always worry about escalating. So they always ask about, well, I'm not going to start hitting someone anytime. No. So I always give them a proper scale of how to intervene depending on the situation. And that goes from the most basic, somebody being in my space, but not intrusive, all the way to someone encroaching and starting to insist, and now starting to realize that, hey, we might need to either run away or we're going to have to fight. And so when we get to that point, that's where we integrate the techniques. So the techniques, they're the most efficient techniques, and they're the simplest that I have. So I've taken the arsenal that I've been training with Kevin and put it into a program. So of course, we'll do everything that's standing, all of the strikes that are standing, whether it's be open hand, palm strikes, hammer fist, elbows are fantastic. Understanding how the body moves, every strikes with the knees, with the feet, the kicks, and so on and so forth. For example, I wouldn't teach the round kick, which I love. I love the technique, I love the work, but it takes a huge amount of time to train. There is a lot of technique attached, and it requires quite a bit of power. And most of my students, they don't stay with me for years. The maximum that I've had are 3 to 4 years people staying with me. But usually, women will want to do a course that lasts between 6 and 12 months. So I need to give them things that will work as quickly as possible. So I don't teach them throws, right? I don't insist on things that require mechanics, that when size matters and you don't have the right mechanics, I don't want you to obsess on throwing someone on the ground when you can do so many more things, right?
Right.
And then it goes into techniques on how to get out of holds. So for example, when you're in a bear hug, or when someone picks you up from the front or from the back, how do you get out from those situations? You know, what to use, your legs, your arms, your teeth, your head, everything that's available to you. Realize what's available to you. Same thing on the ground now. How do you get out from a guy when they pin you on the floor, they're sitting on you, or they're not fully sitting on you? How do you move on the floor? How do you kick someone away? How do you have, when you have someone in your guard, how do you get them out of your guard? And how do you get out of mount position? How do you deal when you're flat stomached and someone is on top of you? How do you deal with that? And then we go into actual scenarios of how do you deal with that when you're at home alone and then someone just happens to be in your room? Or how do you deal with when you're at home, you come in and then you realize someone is in your house? How to ambush an attacker, you know, improvised weapons. And then we'll go into the whole gamut of strategies that they need to have. What are the improvised weapons that you can use to defend yourselves? What are the strategies to make your home safer? So all of these elements come in. And then, of course, they're all the basic principles, which are, you need to be fierce, yes, but physically, you need to push into the person, right? You're either very far or you're in very tight. And what you want, it's what I like to call the combat squirrel. I want them to learn to be the combat squirrel. You want to be going around that tree and overwhelming their nervous system. You want to be hitting as fast as possible, as continuously as possible, and you need to make sure that you start to run when you know that they're not going to start to run after you again, right? Because oftentimes you hit maybe once or twice, you think it's enough, the person turns around, and then the attacker gets back up, catches up, and then the fight starts all over again.
Finish it.
Finish it as much as you can.
That's the thing. In my training, which I have a Jeet Kune Do background, but one of the things that they said is you don't start on 3 or 4 and work, like if it's a scale like 1 to 10 of intensity, because you don't know if this guy's on 10 and you're on 3 or 4, you're dead before he's gonna he's up on 10 to kill you. You don't, doesn't mean you have to kill him, but you can always, it's easier to come down than go up,
Absolutely.
in your intensity. So they always say, when you're in a situation, you start on 10 and you drop down and you make sure that the job's done before you back off or whatever.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's very, very similar.
Well, to me, it has to be that, especially when it's a fight. If you can avoid the fight, if you can de-escalate the fight,
Right.
yes, by all means, please de-escalate. And if it's like you say, your posture, your strength, your capacity to assert yourself, the distance that you create, staying calm, all of those elements are necessary. And what's really important is we need to understand that when we train the body to defend ourselves and acquire technique, it builds our self-confidence to be able to define that space. And the more we define that space, the less chances we have to find ourselves into combative situations, because then we stay calm. Everything works together to develop a person that's whole, that's confident, that's assertive. And predators, they always have an interview period. They either interview from afar or they interview from close. They look at you from afar, they scan. This is their career. That's what they
Okay.
do all the time. They
So
observe.
talk about this. Talk about this a little bit more. I don't mean to interrupt you, but go into this, because this is important for women to understand this.
Yeah.
Talk about that interview process so that people, their detectors can go off when they're getting out of their car, or they're going to the. So what is it that they say, and what should a woman say in return to some of this? What's the interview process you're talking about, I guess?
So if we go from far, and I mean, I watch a lot of TV series that are just talk about reality situations where, for example, there was a couple who would stalk women, and they would just ride in their vans, and all they would do would scan for the appropriate target, right? And what they do is that they look at, is the environment clear? Is there other people around? What does that person look like? Is she going to fight back? Or is it going to be easy to subdue this person? And so they scan, they look at your energy, they look at your posture, they look at how you walk, they look at everything about how you do what you do things. Do you look like someone who's eager to help? Do you look like someone who absolutely wants to help? Do you look like someone who won't say no? These are all the things that they look at. Okay, so from afar. And then when you come close, for example, in a bar, and again, my goal isn't to make people paranoid. My goal is to make people aware. And there are many, many levels now of intervention, because in what I teach, I don't just teach technique, I also teach, because, I'm sorry, let me get back, just a parenthesis. Like I said before, 84% of assaults on women are made by people that they know, whether it be 45% their spouse, or the rest being their family, friends, or just people that they know. Okay, so most of assaults can be prevented just by avoiding all of these situations where you're not listening to your gut, you see signs of someone being abusive or aggressive, or they're hurtful, or they say things that are demeaning, but you don't listen to it, and you decide to still go and keep on going in the relationship, which in time becomes physically abusive. But fundamentally, like any kind of assault, it always starts with the psyche. Always. It's always about the psyche. So we go through all of those elements, whether it be a random attack, all the way to domestic violence.
Okay.
So everything in my course anyway, we talk about those things. So in a bar, for example, someone will ask you, can I get you a drink? Can I buy you a drink? And the girl will say no, but she'll say it a little bit sheepishly. She doesn't want to be offensive. So she kind of, turns her back a little. And at that moment, that person, if he is a predator, understands that she won't necessarily fight back, that actually she just wants to avoid. Ideally, what we want is someone who will turn towards the person in a polite way. We don't want to be aggressive. We don't want to be offensive, but we want to be assertive in the way that we say no. And so a predator, if they want to have control and power, their goal is they're going to keep on asking, and they're going to push, and they're going to see how far does it take for them to get the yes.
Hmm.
And that's what we need to understand, is that they're going to push until they get the yes. And once
Right,
you've
right.
given them the yes, then that's when trouble starts. And so
Yeah,
what
yeah.
happens is that a lot of us have a tendency to say no, but not assertive, not strong. And again, I'm not saying yell, I'm saying be assertive. No, thank you. I'm not interested.
People know when you're serious. And they know,
Exactly.
you know, they know when you're an assertive person, they know
Mhm.
when you're an avoidant type of person, they know
Exactly.
when, you know, they know this, they can pick up on that. And
Yes.
like you're saying, if you turn toward the person and you say, "No, I'm not interested. Thank you though."
Yes.
Even
Exactly.
that, you know, that's polite, but you're like, okay, this person is not, they're not turning away. They're not, oh no, it's okay. You know, that's, you know, that
Exactly.
gives them that signal. Um,
Exactly.
so let's put this in a different type of scenario,
Okay.
and that is let's talk about the person, the woman going to her car out of the
Mhm.
grocery store or something like that. It's night or whatever. She's got to go pick up diapers or whatever, you know, situation, and it happens, you know,
Of course.
and so, you know, excuse me, do you know where do you know where the subway is, you know, that kind of thing, you know.
Yes.
That happens, you know what I
Of
mean.
course.
That's starting the interview, you know what I mean. Excuse me, do you know
Exactly.
where. So take it from there. I'm sure you've dealt with that scenario before.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So, yes, absolutely. That happens a lot. To me, it starts before the interview process. Okay. Because
Okay.
this is about having targets of opportunity, right? This is someone that's scanning the parking lot to see which is the best possible target, right? So
Okay.
I really like to have a tactical flashlight, which is also what I use to defend myself if need be. So if I were to be in a dark parking lot, going to my car, well, you need to be aware of what your environment is. There's no
Hmm.
one in the parking, so you need to up your alertness level higher. You need to be clear. You need to observe the
Right.
environment. You need to look around. And as soon as that happens, usually you're less of a mark because
Hmm.
they know that you know, they know that you're looking around. And I always put my flashlight on so that I can see from afar. So
Hmm.
that way, I'm no longer as interesting to be walked upon. Okay, so that's
Hmm.
the first thing. But let's say that I've done everything right. I've done the flashlight, but you know, that predator is really wanting to attack me. Well, then it becomes about how to define your space, right?
Okay.
And making sure that you're very clear. A lot of people, because they don't want to look fearful, they don't move because they say, well, I'm going to stay in my spot and I'm going to show them that I'm not afraid. But by
Okay.
doing that, they allow people to come far too close. And then the predators become in a range where they can grab them easily. And
Hmm.
once they've been grabbed, if you haven't been preparing your psyche to fight back, it's very difficult to get out of that. That's
Okay.
why everything is about preparation and everything is about being aware of your environment and then, making sure that you take enough space and that you put your hands out and you say, excuse me, sir, but you're too close. I need you to back away. Back off. Sir, I said back off. And then you can use the flashlight to either blind them, counterattack, and then go back into the store, right? So there's all kinds
Right,
of
right.
alternatives that you can have. And of course, in Canada here, we don't have guns, but I have seen a video where the woman has the flashlight, she blinds the attacker, and then, has her gun and says, I have my gun, you'd better run away. We don't have that here. So we need to be clear as to what we are willing to do and not do. You need to understand also what your skills or what your capacities are, what your attributes are. I can't run my lungs. I have difficulty with my lungs. So I
Okay.
know that I have to be able to fight, which means that if you're going to do that to me, you better get ready because
Okay.
I'm going to lay it all on the line. Yeah. And
You gotta stack the deck in your favor, you know,
you
and that's
do.
the whole thing. Is and I
You
like
do.
the idea of carrying that flashlight because
Yeah.
you have to. You know, you can't be dumb about your self-protection, you know, and
Of course.
that's the problem because if you are not thinking things through, you're going to be one of these people who are going to end up in a self-defense course going, hey, I got raped and mugged or something like that, unfortunately. And unfortunately for women, I mean, it's unfortunate, but guys are normally looking for, for
Yep,
something more with a woman than they are from a man. They're
exactly.
not just looking for their money. They're
Yeah, of
looking to do probably sexual harm to them as well. And
of course.
so if you're a woman out there, stack the deck in your favor, carry the flashlight, carry a
Yeah,
knife. If you're in the States, carry, if you can, carry a gun. Learn how to use it, so you're not whatever. You got to learn how to use all this stuff as well. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So, what do you think is the? I wanted to ask you two questions here. What do you think is the biggest hurdle that you've seen when you're training women? What's the biggest hurdle for women to overcome in your training?
Okay,
So you
so
get a woman in self-defense. You're getting this course. Have you noticed that there's a particular problem that kind of comes up over and over again?
oh yeah,
That
absolutely. There are a few actually. But before I answer that question, I just want to make sure, yes, it's true here we can't carry guns, but it is important to know how to manipulate a gun. So we do teach women how to manipulate guns and understand how they work. If at the very least to know to throw it away. That if you can't use it, don't use it because it could be used against you. But it's
right?
also the same thing with a knife, right? We want women to know how to manipulate a knife, but we also do not recommend that women carry knives because it could be very dangerous for them. And if they
Okay.
don't practice it, it's not like they're doing martial arts for 20 years.
Right.
They're
Right.
doing
Right.
self-defense for 3, 6, 12 months. So for me, this is a weapon that's too dangerous. A baseball bat, however, at home, yes, absolutely. That's awesome, right?
Okay.
So
All right.
there's certain
Yeah.
things that I'll show that are more effective. That's why the flashlight to me is really the best self-defense weapon.
And let me amend that because it isn't like if you put a knife in your hand, you become magically, invincible. You can just as
Exactly.
easily get it taken away from you and have it
Exactly.
used against you,
Yeah.
if you don't know what you're doing. And so that's so important. I thank you for bringing that up because
Yeah, of course.
people think that, well, if I just carry a knife, then no. A friend of mine got into a fight it was out in front of his house, and a guy went into his car and got his bat, and he told the guy, he goes, "You better drop that bat." He goes, "You better drop it. You're in trouble. I will, and he stared him down, and the guy had the bat, and this guy, like a few days before, he was out on the lake, and he actually, this is kind of a little gross, but he couldn't fight. He actually got into an accident and ripped his rectum, and there was no way he could fight. There was no way. But there was a fight going on in front of his house. Somebody came with a bat, and he told him to put the bat down. He just
Yeah.
stared him down. So
Yeah.
if just because you have a weapon does not mean that you are able to use it. Sorry to bring that
Exactly.
story up, but that illustrates the
No,
point.
but it does. And the thing is that women often think, there's this whole thing, and we can go deeply into, the women's psyche, but women have a tendency to think that because we're smaller, we can't do work. And truth be told, I've heard men on YouTube say, well, what's the point of teaching self-defense to women? They're useless anyway. They're too small and they'll never be able to defend themselves. And I'm sorry, but everyone can defend themselves. It's all a question of how you are within your own mind. And
Right.
I thoroughly believe that. I mean, recently I had one of my clients who trained with me for about 6 months, and she was training maybe once or twice a week. And to me, it's always about fierce. Everything you do has to be fierce. When you're training and
Right.
against pads, when you're hitting the pad, hitting like this, like you're petting a cat, is useless. It needs to be fierce. So you don't have to be hitting hard to be fierce.
Right.
It's
Right.
having intensity without necessarily hitting hard. And this woman, she was in my class, and she told me recently that her ex-boyfriend tried to strangle her twice. And because of what she learned in my class, she was able to get out of it twice, brought
Okay.
him to his knees, kneed him in the head, and then was able to run away and call police. And what she told me afterwards, she said, the only thing that mattered to me was that I was fierce. And that was the
Right.
one thing that she remembered. And that to me, with the technique, of course, you can't go without technique, but all of that together made her so, so much stronger.
Mm, yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah.
so to come
So
back, to
let's
get back,
let's go to the question then, because that's I think that's an important one
yeah,
about what's like you find like something coming up over and over again that you have to address
yes,
when you're doing women's self-defense. Go ahead.
yes, absolutely. Women have difficulty hitting. There's a huge inhibition in hitting because they just don't want to hurt somebody else. And we see that a lot, even when they are justified in physically defending themselves, they really don't want to hurt, as in they don't want to hurt, injure somebody else. And or, like I said before, they are worried about the repercussions. And they think
Ah,
that if they don't hit back, that everything will be better. And actually, statistics show there was a research by Pete Jensen and, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting her name, but I could send you the link if that's ever pertinent. But he had done a research exactly for that, stating that the women who actually use physical technique to defend themselves, as well as verbal technique and assertiveness and defining their space, are more likely to get out of physical or sexual assaults than those who don't fight back.
mm,
Because predators get heightened by women or targets of all kinds who don't fight back. They enjoy that more,
yeah.
and they will become even more predatory when you look like a victim.
Right.
So if you're gonna fight, you need to fight completely, totally, and mercilessly, and it needs to be surgical. So women have a huge difficulty in hitting. Some will come in and say, yeah, I'm good with this, no problem, I'll be able to hit. And then when they're actually hitting only a pad, they realize that they're not that capable. And that's really, really difficult for them to realize. So I also come across that quite a bit. And a lot of women come in and say, yeah, I'm not a fighter. I'm not violent. I don't want to be violent. I'm a pacifist. And
Mm,
Kevin says a lot. It's important to be a true pacifist. You need to know what violence is about. And you need to, in my mind, to actually be able to perpetrate violence, to be able to know what being peaceful really is about. It needs to be a choice. And that for me is extremely important. So women oftentimes, they don't see themselves as violent, so therefore they don't want to be doing a class where they will become violent because they believe that they will harness aggression and therefore become aggressive, and they don't want to be that way. And so what I tell women is that to harness that kind of aggression, to harness that, to cultivate that fierceness does not mean that you're always going to be angry, and it doesn't mean that you're always going to be harsh. What it does mean is that you will be able to use that aggression to your advantage if and whenever you need. And so that's the other element, is that a lot of women, they always say, well, how far can I go? You know,
hmm.
what can I do? They're all very concerned about the law. So that's really important to teach them the notion of the use of force, right?
Okay.
And understanding the different levels. What does the law say? What are you allowed to do? How far can you go? And so a lot of women ask that as well. They want to know that they have control on themselves. And some of them will say, well, I'm worried that if I start to hit, I won't stop. And it's a legitimate fear. It's a wise question that they have. And so the more they train, the more they cultivate that capacity to master themselves, to master their psyche, so that they know how the
Right.
situation is going to escalate, because they're going to stay calm, and because they know that they can intervene at every single level of the spectrum of the assault, and they can go from nothing, happening immediately to a combative situation, because their psyche and they were spinal loading in a way that they were preparing themselves for that possibility, but ideally to not go there. So that's very
Right.
important as well, giving them control. And finally, size matters, but they need to understand that there are targets that we can go for that are much more sensitive, no matter who you're dealing with, and that there's always something that you can do. And
Okay.
for that instance, size no longer matters. Fierceness, no matter who you are, affects everyone.
Sure.
The fact that you affect the head affects everyone, right? Hitting to the
Well,
groin, it affects everyone.
Yeah. uh, I wouldn't. Sometimes, you hear about these alley cats. Honestly, these they're fierce. They're small. I mean, I can pick an alley cat up and I can throw it. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to be on the losing side of that. There's no way that I'm going to pick that cat up and get it out of my yard without serious injury to me.
Exactly.
And it's this small thing. It's a small cat.
Yeah,
I
but
mean, I'm way bigger, but you know, these things are they're so aggressive. In
yes,
certain places. Not where I live now, but where I've lived in the past. They're so aggressive. You do not, even a small alley cat like that, you don't want to like have a physical confrontation with. You want to do something else to get out of the way.
yes,
Talk about that with a woman now. Yeah, okay, a guy's bigger, but if a woman like knows where to strike
yep,
and they have that kind of fierceness,
yep,
there's a lot that they can do. There is a
absolutely.
lot that they can do
Yes.
to defend themselves. Do you find any? Do you find any? So let me ask you this. This is going to be a controversial question.
Okay.
Is there a lot of bullshit when it comes to? I'm sure you've looked online at women's self-defense courses. You've had your ear to the ground on this for a while. What's some of the biggest BS that you've seen out there? I know you've talked about it a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more about it. That you would say, hey, look, you need to avoid this. If you're a woman out there and you're listening and you're thinking about taking a self-defense course, what are some warning signs for some BS self-defense courses?
Yeah. So first, if you never pressure test your techniques, that's bullshit. Because I may be in an all women's environment, but you kind of need to get slapped around a little bit to understand how horrifying it is, if only to learn to avoid it as much as possible and to not create aggressive women wanting to find a fight so that they can see what they can do. Yeah. So we want to avoid that. Schools that make you aggressive, that's not what we want. We want to go into being calm, being cognitive, and mastering ourselves, our psyches, and our bodies. So that's one
Right.
that's really, really important. I've heard of schools that teach women to volunteer for the ground. And again, you don't have to be on the ground to be able to defend yourself. It drives me mental that they would say, yes, as soon as there's an attack that comes, and perhaps that's not how it was taught, but that's how the story went. That's how people told me. They go for the ground. Yes, you can be very strong with kicking. Yes, you can definitely, but why? Why put the odds against you by being on the ground? All the attacker needs to do is go to the ground as well. And then you're up shit creek, because getting out from a situation that is on the ground is brutal for any person, no matter who you are, no matter how big you are, no matter your gender. So never, ever volunteer for the ground. And if the school teaches that, get out fast. Another bullshit thing that I've seen is, and I'm sorry, I don't want to be offensive to other styles, not that I know this style, but going for the eyes with crane beaks.
Okay. All right.
And this, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, first of all, you have to have the micro motion to be able to do this, and the presence of mind to do this. And then you have to have the precision to have the beaks into the eyes. And then you also have to have the opponent deciding that he's going to stay so
Mhm.
that you can do that. So I absolutely don't believe in that either. You got to grab the head. When you fight, it's ugly and it's dirty. And it's
Yes.
and you might have blood in your eyes. You might not be able to see. Your glasses might have flown off. You can't count on techniques that require micro skills. It needs to
Mhm.
be macro. You need to stick onto them, counterattack. You need to be fierce. You need to move fast. You need to hit a lot. It needs to be continuous. You need to move continuously, hit continuously as you move. You need to push into them. That's what you want. That's what you want
Right.
to learn, so that it's nonstop, overwhelming their nervous system. Like Kevin teaches the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. You need to interrupt that pattern so that they are no longer able to have their objective. That's what we teach. If they're not teaching you that, wrong school. if they're not teaching you the notion of distance, the notion of prevention, the notion of avoidance, the notion of early detection, if you don't have that in your school, bad, all bad. But if you don't have pressure testing, a lot of women's classes that I've seen, they work on pads and it's great, but everything is done straight and everything is done at a distance, as if you could hit from one arm's length. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
That's why I say combat squirrel. You need to be either far out or completely stuck onto your opponent. So if they're not teaching you to be stuck to your opponent and to gouge and to elbow and go for the eyes, rip the ears, rip the hair, if you're not learning to do that, it's BS to me.
Right. One thing I kind of want to hit on here, and you can amend it in any way you'd like, because I'm not a specialist in women's self-defense at all. But one thing that I do know is you have to have the ability to do the stuff on the spot. Pardon me. You have to be able to know that when a technique or something comes at you, you can't filter it through. Okay, that's a punch, and what do I do against a punch? Oh, I do this against a punch. It's got to be an automatic response, and please go to self-defense courses. The more realistic, the better. But ultimately, if you can, like you've done, been in martial arts for 12 years, that's really what you want to do. You want to be in it for the long term. That's the best way to keep yourself safe. Not that you can't get things out of courses, because you can, and better to do that than not. And it depends on how the courses run. You can learn a lot in a very short amount of time. Yeah. But it is ultimately no replacement for understanding over the long term, how your body works, how you fight, developing that killer instinct, developing your baseline of strength, developing the non-thought process. When a punch comes at me, I don't even think I know what I'm doing. If I pocket out of the way or whatever, depends on the angle, but it's automatic for me at this point. And that just came through going to class, years of experience, going to class, working it. And that's so important. What do you think? Tell me a
Absolutely.
little bit about that.
I totally agree. To me, what's really important, the statistics clearly state this. Women who go to courses that span over 3 months, once a week, feel great at the end of the 3 months. So they've had 12 courses, but statistics show that when they're being surveyed again 6 months later, their confidence has gone back down.
Right.
Because it's the same principle to me as when we do a first aid course. Right? You do the first aid course, you do 15 hours in a weekend, you're good to go. And then 3 months later, you have to do the Heimlich and you're like, what was I supposed to do again? Yeah. So you gotta remove that. So you're absolutely right. For us, it's all about repetition and being in the environment and doing a lot of reps. You have to do a lot of reps and you have to do a lot of scenario training. So it can't just be learning how to hit. It needs to be body on body training. It doesn't have to be injurious to be effective, right? You can still be respectful, but it does work. But to me, I always recommend at least 6 months. And I see it in the women who stay with me for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. It's completely different. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they are, they're confident, everything that they do, there's intensity, whether it's hard or not, they challenge themselves. So yes, I totally agree that you want to be on the long term. The only thing is that not everyone wants to do martial arts. Not everyone wants to be in a co-ed environment. And so there needs to be a good balance, but you just need to find the school that will give you those reps, that will pressure test to make sure that you know your stuff. Because in the end, whatever stressor you're living with, to learn how to stay calm, no matter the stress, is enormous. And without a doubt, if you've never been assaulted, you don't know what it's like, right? So of course, you're going to have a moment of shock, but we still train you to get past that shock. Okay, so that's really, really important. And so you were asking before, one of the reserves that we have for women, Many women, they just deny that violence exists. They just don't want to have to deal with the reality of violence. They'd rather just pretend. And I have a lot of people who say, well, I would just like to take a 1-hour class of self-defense or a 1-day class of self-defense. And I always tell them the same thing. I said, I can teach you. It's better than having nothing, but you are not a superhero. You will not be invincible after this class. You will not be invincible after 6 months, 12 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years of training. No one is invincible. Yeah. So I tell them that all the time.
Right. All right. We're coming up on the end of the program. Last question. And
Yes.
this is the question that I ask all my guests. And I want to know from you, what are your top 3 fighting tips or training methods that you would like to pass on? And it doesn't necessarily have to be related to women's self-defense,
Okay.
but it can be if you want. But your top 3, if you were to pass on 3 fighting tips or training methods, what would they be?
Okay. The first one is listen to your gut. Listen to your intuition, right? This is something that a lot of people think it's fluff and it's esoteric and it's out there. And okay, so yes, I can't scientifically prove how intuition works, but what I do know is that it works, and you can train it and you can get better at it. If you feel like something is off, whether it is someone that you know or you don't know, whatever it is, you're going into an elevator and the guy next to you gives you kind of the creeps, listen to it, act upon it. Super important. Second element, own your authority. You are the best authority there is on you. Nobody else can tell you who you are, what's best for you. You know. You're the one who knows. And so in owning your own authority, allow yourself, give yourself permission to be assertive and to define your space. Everybody has the right to their space, and most people don't realize it, and they give their power away when they don't have to. They feel guilty for not going out with friends or for not helping out a friend. People, because they feel guilty or they worry about offending someone, they won't be assertive and they won't listen to their needs. So you need to own your authority, know who you are, know what you like, know what you don't like, so then when it's time to assert yourself, you can do it in a way that is efficient without being offensive, but all the while being calm and secure within yourself.
And was that was 2?
So it would be intuition, own your own authority, and of course, learn to be assertive and to define your space. So that would be the third element, is to define your space. Make sure that you create that space physically and psychologically, that you don't allow people to come into that space, so that you can give yourself the time to fight back if you need, to assess the situation and adapt to the situation accordingly. That space is extremely important.
Alexandrina, you've been a delight. Can you please tell people where to find you online? If you have any, do you have courses available or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm going to be putting up courses again soon. I had paused them, but they should be starting back in June. My website, sorry, is gotac.ca. So GOTAC.ca. And so people can find me there, have all of the information on the courses that we provide. We provide seminars as well as classes that are ongoing throughout the year, as well as courses in and of themselves that are 4 to 6 weeks on specific topics.
All right. Stay with me here for just a second. I want to talk to you afterwards, but I'm going to go ahead and close out the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening or watching the Empty Cup podcast. If you like what you heard, please do us a favor and give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, wherever you're hearing this. That really helps people find the show, and share it on your favorite social media. That also just helps build our audience. We really appreciate that. Also, if you like what you heard, you can follow us on Facebook at Facebook.com/The Empty Cup Podcast, and on Twitter at Empty Cup Podcast. And I do have my own YouTube channel where I do some vlogging, some ideas and stuff that don't quite make it onto the program, like little shorter programs. And I do techniques there too. I do training on that as well. It's called Ronin JKD. That's on YouTube, RONINJKD. Look me up there. And please look Alexandrina up as well. And if you get in contact with her through the show, please let her know that you heard about it through the program. So I think that's it. And until we meet again, please keep your gloves up.